think it's the PDF. Yeah. Oh. Okay. All right. Good morning. Welcome. Economic Matters Committee, February 4th. We're having our briefing on the status of the unemployment insurance system. We have the secretary and her team here, and so we'll let you introduce your team, Madam Secretary. Thank you for joining us this morning. Go through your slides, and then after you do that, we'll take questions from the committee.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'm joined here at the table today by Deputy Secretary Jason Perkins Cohen, who is also the interim Assistant Secretary of Unemployment Insurance. He is leading that division right now. Sabrina Steele, who's our Policy Director in Unemployment Insurance, and also Daniel Ross. He's an intern joining us this semester from Crofton. He's a sophomore at Cornell, so we're excited to have him here with us. And also we have our council and our broader team here in the room to help assist in answering any questions you may have. So we're excited to come before you today and appreciate your taking the time. We're going to walk through and update some top-line data information, some of the challenges in the unemployment insurance system and how we've sought to address them, some issues around funding and fund stability, as well as some recent audit findings. So if we could go to the first slide. Yeah, it is, but somehow I guess we're not seeing it.
Why isn't their slide showing up?
It's okay. If,
Are you able to move it, Daniel, or no? Just for... Okay, someone's gonna help us.
I shared it.
well, let's wait. Let's wait for the committee staff to tell us what to do. Yeah.
That's actually while we're working.
Yes.
That, do you know any good jokes?
No, but actually it's getting close to Chinese New Year, so my family has a tradition where we do our own personalized fortunes, and we put little like things, I tend to put things my parents said in the fortunes, then people open them up. An old favorite is my mom's. It's never too late to go to medical school. Or my dad's, which was be grateful for other people's incompetence. It's what makes you look good. I was like, Dad, what are you saying about me? So, yeah, exactly. So I've just shared. Welcome other aphorisms or fortunes, if any members of the committee would like us to include them.
I had it up, but it wasn't on that screen. Should I share it to the Zoom? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Here we go. All right, so if you could go to the first slide, maybe, the next one. Can we advance? Okay, so the first we want to talk about some of the data. Next slide. So this is where we are in terms of unemployment insurance claims. I will say we are roughly, I think, consistent with where we were before the pandemic. One of the questions we get a lot is what has been happening in Maryland, especially in this past year? Have you seen an incredible surge in claims? As you can see from this data, we have not, although the numbers have been ticking up over the last year or two. If you advance to the next slide, specifically you can see what's going on with federal claims. The spike there, not surprisingly, is from the federal shutdown. Just a note to remind everyone, federal claims are reimbursed by the federal government. So those do not, even though we may pay them initially as the state, we are reimbursed by the federal government. So those claims do not impact the longer-term health of the trust fund because they're paid on the federal side. And those individuals who are, for example, furloughed and may have received unemployment insurance, once they receive retroactive back pay, they actually have to return that money back. So even though there is a spike, those claims are eventually paid back. Next slide. So this is where we are in terms of timeliness, and I will note there, timeliness, generally speaking, is it paying within 21 days for first payment. That is the U.S. Department of Labor metric. Maryland also is covered by various other metrics as a result of litigation, other statutory changes. There are a couple things I want to draw the committee's attention to on this slide. One is, as you can see, pre-pandemic, the timeliness that in both Maryland and nationally was very high. And the green line is where Maryland is now in terms of timeliness. We fell precipitously after the pandemic. Also, that was the adoption of the beacon system in 2020, and you can see we have still not yet recovered, although we have made important improvements and we are closing in on the national average. I would say all states have struggled since pandemic because of the increase in fraudulent or potentially fraudulent claims. That means that there's just a lot more work that needs to be done and a lot more back and forth in some instances to be able to determine whether a claim is legitimate, and that does impact timeliness. And this slide emphasizes that point. Pre-pandemic, often UI fraud was spoken about as a person applied for a benefit that they didn't deserve to have for whatever reason. What we've seen post-pandemic is really the rise in potential identity fraud or theft and questions about whether or not the claimant is even who they claim to be. As you can see, this is ID fraud only on this slide. We're not even talking about other kinds of issues that may arise with a claim, that we're seeing a consistent level of potential ID fraud, and that does tend to impact the claims process. Sometimes this is, these things are checked and they found to be fine. A person moved recently. They changed their bank account recently. Other things have happened. They changed their name because they got married or divorced. Like, all of these things can throw up flags. In a post-pandemic era, we scrutinize these claims just to make sure that people aren't having their identity stolen. In some cases, people are also impacted where their identity was stolen during the pandemic, and so there's a flag on their account, so we then have to go investigate that and figure out what's going on. I want to pause before I go into the challenges to see if there are any questions on any of the data so far.
I have one on.
Yes, Delegate Weigel.
So when you talk about the fraud, I've actually had a couple of constituents who received notices that they had to repay their.
So I'm recognizing Delegate Weigel, if we can get his mic working, just so that you're on the record and recorded.
All right, thank you. Just a question on the fraud issue while you're on this slide. I've had a couple constituents, probably 3 or 4, reach out to us that got a notice that they had to repay unemployment claims, but they never received unemployment. So how does that happen? Is that potentially someone filed fraudulently under their name? Or?
Absolutely, and we'll go into this more at the end with the overpayments. The department ceased collecting overpayments during the pandemic and never turned it back on consistently under the prior administration. We turned that back on in 2023 going forward, but there were a lot of retroactive claims from pandemic era up till now that had not been addressed. So what we have done as part of trying to address, we have a duty to collect overpayments under the law. We also believe that's something that needs to be done to protect the trust fund, is there were literally hundreds of thousands of claims or potentially overpaid claims that had not been addressed, backed up, going back to 2020. We have sent letters out to all of those people to say, we have on the books, it appears that you received benefits to which you may not have been entitled. Please help us clear this up. We recognize, because there was a lot of ID fraud during the pandemic, that many people, and we're getting a high volume of calls about this exact situation your constituents are explaining. We have people who can clear it up. We can get that cleared up. And of course, I would encourage any of you who've heard it from constituents, please reach out to Andrew and Caroline on our legislative team. We'll address it immediately. I know it's stressful for constituents. Unfortunately, it was so incredibly widespread that we are hearing from many people that this was not a legitimate claim. Someone stole my ID, but it's important to get that cleared up.
So when someone does.
Sorry, Delegate Weibel, I'm sorry. Can I apologize? I think that I shouldn't have probably called on you because now a bunch of people have questions, and I think I want to wait until.
All right.
Because I think some of the questions are related to things that you have coming up. So if we could just see the whole presentation, and then we'll take questions.
Of course,
and that's my mistake, so thank you.
Absolutely, yes, and we will address this further.
I'll start with you, Delegate Weibel.
Okay, so ongoing challenges, and this will help provide context for some of these additional questions, we hope. As I noted, identity theft increased dramatically during the pandemic. The department has made a number of critical changes here, including instituting True ID verification, or you can go to the post office to verify your ID. We've instituted a bunch of fraud finding tools and checks, but it does mean that sometimes individuals can get caught up in this in their claim, and they have to resolve it before we're able to process their claim and they're able to continue. And as I mentioned, when there's a change to sensitive info, for example, pay my UI check to this bank account instead of that one, that immediately sends up a flag for us, and we do additional review of those types of cases. Next slide. While all this has been going on, unfortunately, we are facing a situation where federal administrative funding, so the way UI works is the trust fund money, the contributions that are paid by employers goes into the trust fund to pay benefits. But the program has to run. We have to pay for the IT, we have to pay for staff. Federal administrative funding, if that money has come from the federal government, has basically remained flat in real terms, which means in real terms it's not increasing, and it's not keeping up certainly with all of the new fraud detection mechanisms which we need to put in place. So what we have done, we recognized the Beacon system was not performing as we would like, and so we were able to secure tens of millions of dollars in grants from the federal government to try to modernize and improve customer service. Unfortunately, last year, under the new administration, they pulled back all of those grants. They took back $25 million in grants they had awarded to the Department of Labor, to Maryland Department of Labor, to make some of those improvements. So we do not have those funds to make those badly needed improvements. We were able to include in last year's BRFA a small amount of the taxable wage base to go directed to administrative funding. That did not increase taxes for employers. It's deducted, but just because of the way the law works, you have to charge it separately. You can't take it out of the contribution. So we are doing that to mitigate this. Many other states have done something similar. And one thing that we found also that it's important to do, and I'll speak about it a little bit more, is increasing in-person services and services from state staff. Next slide. So this goes to strengthening customer support. I think I may have said this before this committee, several months into taking over as secretary, I went downstairs and I said, who are these people waiting in the lobby? What are they doing? And it turned out we were telling people who came to our department seeking help, scan this QR code on the wall and you'll get an appointment with Accenture, who could not actually resolve people's issues. They just had to elevate them. It took some time, but we have ramped down that contract, and we are staffing our own call center with state staff starting last year. That call center contract, as you can see, cost the state nearly $300 million over those couple of fiscal years. We understand it was an emergency during pandemic. There was a need for a surge, but even in post-pandemic times, it was costing us over $30 million per year. We're able to staff it at closer to $9 million with state staff. So that is also state staff under UI law. Only state staff is able to resolve issues on people's claims. So it's important to have people answering the phone who can actually do something about the problem people have with their claim. And then we've had in-person service. Obviously, I didn't want people to have to deal with a QR code. I wanted people to be served in person. If they have come to our office, they need to be served in person. And so that's what we do. And we have served, and we've put some staff, also frontline UI staff, in some of the job centers where we get the highest volume. We served over 14,000 residents in person last year. I mentioned the IT challenges. I think, unfortunately, all of you are very familiar with Beacon, and so are your constituents, and the shortfalls. As you saw in that initial slide, Maryland used to be a top performer in terms of timeliness, but since coming to this new system, we have really lagged the rest of the nation. We also lost about, I would say, 150 staff over the time of the prior administration in UI alone. So as you can surmise, not having as many staff meant we couldn't get to as much work. We appreciate the General Assembly actually put an exception in last year's personnel limitations and personnel cuts to make sure we could address this with UI staff. We are continuing to hire and staff up. We also are using technology to try to improve our services. We redesigned the website to just be much more user-friendly and intuitive and less legalese. And we received some grants from external partners to work on how do we figure out how to adopt some of these technology tools, including some AI-based tools to help improve customer service. I also want to note we are working closely with our union representatives in a dialogue about this. I believe that AI can be very helpful in terms of providing better state service, but I also believe that state workers are the experts, and we need to make sure they're included in the technology adoption process. Now to overpayments. Next slide. So thank you, Delegate, for this question. Many of your constituents are probably receiving these letters now. Let me just do some context setting around overpayments. Those are payments people shouldn't have gotten because someone stole their ID, they weren't eligible to begin with under the law, or maybe they were working another job, so they should have had benefits, but a reduced amount of benefits. Federal law requires us to go back and collect these overpayments. We have to establish an overpayment within 3 years for it to be recoverable. Older overpayments can also be deemed uncollectible if it's, for example, we had some that were sitting out 10, 20 years. It was clear that we were not going to get those funds back, and we should be focusing on getting the near-term payments back. I just want to underscore that many of the overpayments we're talking about now, and that were the subject of an audit I will touch on in a moment, were federal emergency benefits. When we recover those monies go back to the feds. If it was paid from our state trust fund as a matter of regular unemployment insurance, we pay that back into our state trust fund. None of this impacts the general fund. So this is what we're facing, and as a reminder, I know many of you were here and we saw the incredible spike in unemployment insurance claims surging to over 1.7 million claims in Maryland alone in 2020. And the state paid out almost $7 billion in benefits. As we saw, there was rampant identity theft during that time, and GAO estimates there was about $135 billion in fraud. Maryland stopped collecting overpayments in 2020, and we did not consistently resume until under this administration in the summer, fall of 2023. Complicating that was the department was sued for issuing overpayments but not giving people the right to appeal those determinations, which you can see as a constituent, you would say, wait a second, you got it wrong. How can I appeal that? The department was not allowing people to appeal those determinations. So there was litigation, and there was a settlement in 2022 requiring Maryland to cease what we were doing again and establish a process to notify claimants of their appeal rights. Next slide, please. So despite that settlement, the prior administration did not actually implement that. They didn't implement the new notices. They did not turn on the overpayment recovery. They were able to recover a sizable amount that was frozen with a financial institution. There was a period during the pandemic where benefits were being issued on debit cards through a bank. And so, however, it became rapidly obvious there were some potentially fraudulent issues going on. So the bank froze close to $1 billion in those debit card benefits. The prior administration was able to recover about $484 million. However, it never sort of totted up the accounts to figure out which those matched against and which they didn't. During this administration, we started reissuing overpayment determinations, ones that are compliant with the law. in 2023 after we came into office. And we also started starting the process to start collecting on those overpayments. People get numerous notices, and then if they're not able to figure it out, then it eventually goes to collections. We also were negotiating with the financial institution to get the rest of the $1 billion back. That took some time. Last summer, we were able to get another $500 million back. We're in the process of completing the reconciliation of all those funds. So that was another significant return on potential overpayments. Again, the vast majority of those are almost certainly pandemic-era payments, so they will go back to the federal government. They will not stay with the department here. And we have been working with Federal Department of Labor on that return. Finally, go back. And Delegate Weibel, this gets to your question. We did mail at the end of last year about 180,000 overpayment notices. And these are notices that are covered in the audit, which I'll touch on in a moment. But this is going back basically over the last 5 years. To the extent you received an overpayment, an individual received an overpayment notice, we either cured it to make sure it gives you your overpayment, your appeal rights, or there were many individuals who never received the notices because the process was turned off, going backward. So next slide. We recognize, we're hearing a lot from people who said either my ID was stolen, this never happened, maybe I told the department before this happened, how come this is coming back? We recognize that we may not have complete records. It's possible some individuals are hearing from us again, or it was not completely resolved. And we are very apologetic to the extent it's causing people distress, but it's important to work through all of these letters and figure out how we can help people resolve these, because frankly, it's still sitting in their file. So if they do need to file for unemployment insurance now, this is going to show up and delay them at a time when they're really in need of the funds. So it's important to clear out all of these claims and all of these accounts to the extent people had their ID stolen. On the slide, you can see here's where we have a dedicated overpayments webpage. We've been working through and helping individuals try to resolve their claims as quickly as possible. On solvency, we're going to touch on this briefly. I believe we will also, to the extent there is legislation before the committee, we'll also be happy to talk more about the specifics of that legislation in a subsequent hearing. I believe we've briefed the committee on this before, but the average high cost multiplier is the AHCM, is basically the benchmark of solvency, and that's one, which is to say, does the state have enough in its trust fund to last for a year of a typical recession to pay out benefits? And that's the marker of solvency. Next slide. This is how Maryland is doing compared to, so the dotted line there on the one is where we'd have to be in terms of managing our average high cost multiple. So, we're above one now, and the reason that it's so important is being above one is what enables, there's some other requirements too about changing the law and increasing taxes, but that's what allows the state to borrow interest-free from the federal government. Just say you do have a serious recession, you're draining your trust fund, you're saying, well, we need additional funds to pay benefits, but we don't want to float a bond, we don't want to do other things. You can, as long as you have been recently maintaining good solvency, you can go to the federal government and they will back up your trust fund with an interest-free loan. So that's why it's an important marker of solvency to protect the state from having to draw on other funds. This is another version of, well, actually this shows the ins and outs, right? Benefits paid, contributions. You can see during the pandemic, there were a much higher level of benefits paid and lower contributions, but the spike in employer contributions, many of you may recall, that's what happens when there's a change in the tax tables, and that's what happened during pandemic. Then there was a set of changes made by this body to infuse other funds into the trust fund, set the employer tax tables at table C, and over the last 2 years we've been at table A. So that's why the contributions have come down, the green bars. I just want to note this, and this is part of the long-term solvency of the trust fund and its issues. Over time, the portion of people who are getting a UI benefit at the maximum level, which is $430 a week, has been rising. And that is because wages, the benefits are calculated based on people's wages, and as wages have gone up, but the ceiling has not changed on the benefits, more and more people are bumping up against that ceiling. These are factors that contribute to the solvency. Obviously, I mentioned the prior infusion with ARPA funds during the prior administration. The rising inflation and wages keeps average weekly benefits going up, but because our taxable wage base is fixed, there is a natural limit among contributions. So over time, the contributions will probably not keep up. With some of these increases, the taxable wage base, maximum taxable wage base in Maryland is $8,500. We do have some modeling, and we're happy to present more to the committee. This up and down looks a little bit confusing, but actually what the main thing to take away from that is what we're using in our modeling is an average unemployment rate of 4.9%. That's the average from, you know, that 35-year period from 1990 to recently. Next slide. This is what we project. The model is one developed by U.S. Department of Labor. This is what our solvency looks like against the average high cost multiple in years if no action is taken. Obviously, over time, what would happen if there was a huge draw on the trust fund is tax tables would start to go up and things would change. But this is without those changes or impacts. This is what's going to happen. Next slide. I think the next one's the last one. And this shows an example of what would happen in terms of changing contributions. Eventually, the way our law works, if the amount of money in the trust fund goes down over time, then the tax tables go up, or they go up in letters, A to C to eventually E, and that increases the amount of tax that employers are facing. I will note, you know, one of the difficulties is that usually happens during a recession. And so having tax increases in a recessionary time can be very difficult for employers. And certainly during the pandemic, we saw an extreme set of tax increases because of the volatility of the economy at that time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start with Delegate Weigel since I cut off your questions. If they haven't been answered subsequently, you can go next, and then we'll see who else has questions.
Just to finish up the last conversation, you mentioned a couple names that we could contact. So I don't know if we got the issues resolved yet or not. So can you just email us those?
Absolutely.
The committee,
Yes,
those
yes,
contacts that we
absolutely.
need. Thank you. And I get my audits confused, but I read one that there was $700 million lost due to a missed deadline and couldn't be recovered. Was that unemployment or was that some other?
That is referred to unemployment, and I can speak to that a little bit more, Delegate, if you'd like me to.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, under Maryland law, you have 3 years to establish an overpayment. So if the overpayment happened in 2020, I have until 2023 to say, hey, it looks like you were overpaid, you owe us $10,000 back or $5,000 back. Unfortunately, because the overpayment process was paused, both due to pandemic and later because of the litigation, there are a number of claims, and the audit period looked at, I think, a period from 2022 to part of 2023. So, you know, a large part of that was not during this administration. But from what I know, they said the problem is because you didn't act within that 3-year window, you missed the statute of limitations, and therefore you can't go back in time to establish those overpayments. And so that is what happened, is because of the first turning off overpayments and then having the litigation but never correcting the issues in a timely way during the prior administration, we did not get that fixed until several months into our administration. There is a window of payments that we're not able to go back and get. A couple caveats to that. We don't agree with the exact number that OLA came out with. We think they, first of all, we didn't have the chance to see their tables before they issued that audit. And we think they also were not able, because we hadn't had all the accounting, to account for the nearly $500 million we recovered from the financial institution. So we do believe some of those funds were recovered in other ways. Some of those we were able to go back and issue these letters to, because we may have issued an overpayment letter earlier. It just was defective and did not have the appeal rights in it. So we went back and reissued those determinations. But absolutely, sorry.
Was that money to be recovered from the federal government or from the individuals that were suspected to be overpaid?
The money is to be recovered from the individuals and to be paid back to where it came from. Overwhelmingly, these are pandemic era claims, we believe. I think also 80 or 90% of them predate this administration. So we believe the vast majority would go back to the federal government if it's recovered.
If I can just make one quick point of clarification, the audit, which is a little,
Here.
the full audit covers November 2020 till something in 2025, January of 2025. Audit finding 1 that you're referring to, the auditors, for whatever reason, chose to look only at the slice of the moratorium that was established because of the settlement, which runs from January 2022 till September 2023. So it's all looking backwards at that period of time, not the newer things that have happened.
All right, so does the federal government continue collections for that? Or so if the money, the overpayment wasn't collected from the individual, and you said it goes back to whoever paid it, so if it was the federal government that paid it, do they just write that off, or is the state of Maryland on the hook for paying that?
The state is responsible for trying to pursue the overpayments. Many of the federal government, this happened basically in every single state in the country, and the money went out the door. The federal government has not indicated that, we keep an account with them of what we've sent back, and we have sent almost $1 billion back to the federal government. I believe Maryland is, frankly, among the percentage recovered, probably doing much better than many other states have done. But, we keep them apprised of what's happening. I think we all recognize a lot of benefits were spent during CARES Act. They were, appropriated on an emergency basis. It's our duty to try to recover them. But we don't have any indication there will be, anything put against the state trust fund or against the states. But, this is always evolving.
Okay, and then the folks who, I guess their identity was stolen or whatever, how do they justify that or prove that they never received that money? You have a process for that?
Yes, we
I
do.
assume.
Can you guys speak in more detail about the process?
Sure. They reach out to, we can only know if they have an issue by them reaching out to us. They're doing that either through the phone or through in-person support. We walk through a process with them where we see their identification. We verify that it's not the same information that was used at the time that they applied for benefits. And assuming that all checks out, and that's checked out quite a few times, they are not on the hook for the overpayment.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And we'd be happy again to work with you on any.
Yeah, if you can just send us the contacts, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Delegate Chi.
First of all, I know what an extraordinarily difficult task you have, so kudos to the department for trying your best. You probably got too many complaints and not enough appreciation. Having said that, I do wonder, in terms of your presentation about recovery of overpayments from a financial institution, could you explain which financial institution, how the process works?
I'm sorry, which financial institution?
Yeah, you said recovered hundreds of millions from a financial institution. A couple of places on page 15. March 2022, Maryland recovered the $484 million from a financial institution.
Yes.
And then June 2025, Maryland recovered the $520 million from a financial institution. Which financial institution?
Sorry, it was a negotiated
okay.
settlement, and we do have a non-disclosure agreement, but it was Bank of America. I can disclose that.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So because I was focused more on the constituent issues, which is recovery of overpayments to individuals, right? Instead of, I was just curious, because I thought for a moment that they were the sort of middlemen that transfer money or was collecting on behalf of the state, but that's not the case.
They were the holder of the debit cards.
Oh.
So during that, there was a brief period where there was a surge in like putting all these emergency benefits on debit cards. They were the holder of the debit cards when they, through their bank procedures, or because we said, we got this claim, there's something suspicious about it, hold, those accounts were frozen. And so they've been held in this suspension. And then we were able to recover that most recent $500 million.
Okay, great. So a follow-on question about individual overpayments. What happens within the 3-year period if you repeatedly reach out and request or demand for overpayment and people just ignore you? What's the consequence for that?
It eventually gets sent to collections. They need to have 3 opportunities to respond and pay. There can, many things can happen. People can appeal, and so, or they can say this was fraud, or they can work out a payment plan with us. There's also a process where, and the state, because it had not been collecting overpayments, was not able to take advantage of this process. We are able to now, because we've turned it on. It's doing what's called tripping and topping, which is there can be offsets against things like tax refunds or other payments. So that's part of a federal process that works. It's part of the federal-state process partnership, and you have to work with U.S. Treasury on that. We have turned that process back on as well. So that's another way that overpayments can be recovered.
And just a suggestion, thanks for answering my questions. Could we have some data on what percentage has been recovered and how successful the recovery is? Because we continue to get complaints from people who said, you know, they claim that I got overpayment, but I never got payment. But, so this is clarifying, you know, this is good to know there are many factors that go into this back end of it and how to channel their issues. You know?
Absolutely, Delegate. I do think we recognize, again, because so many of these payments were in that 2020 to 2022 period, we recognize many of them may have been the result of identity theft. So we will put out letters, but we recognize many of those funds may never come back if they were because of fraud.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Rose.
Oh, thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you for being here today. I'm sure it has been incredibly difficult. So I just want to clarify, and not to keep beating the dead horse, but I just want to make sure, because I have quite a few people who've reached out to me, and I appreciate Andrew, helping us. So if somebody gets that letter, and they, for example, work, not a lucrative job, and they say that they owe $15,000. They're in the 3-year, it's beyond the 3 years, so it's from the COVID time. Mm-hmm. They did what they were told to do on the letter as far as, I think, appealing it or whatever that first initial step was. But it's not up to them to prove that somebody, how can they prove if somebody else was getting money on their behalf? Because they're very concerned that they're going to owe $15,000 and, they didn't do anything wrong. So is the onus on them to prove that? Because how would they know if somebody was getting benefits under their name and they have no knowledge of it?
Right. No, we do ask them to come forward with information showing that they didn't receive it themselves. We have an affidavit process also. I look to my colleagues to add more details to how can a person demonstrate that?
Yeah, how would they prove that?
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, they're providing their own identification and their own information based on sort of a question and answers back and forth. It's enough for us to know that the person or the entity that applied on their behalf, not on their behalf, applied using their information was not correct. But we do go through information exchange, but they certainly don't have to prove who else
they don't
did it.
have to give you bank statements and tax returns and all this.
They have to give us enough identifying information where we know we can discern that they are different than the entity that applied.
Okay, but if they applied and they got what they were supposed to get, and it's past the 3 years.
There are 2 issues. It could be someone stole my identity and I never got paid. I never got that amount. There were also some pandemic era benefits where we started paying the benefits. And this is, the prior administration, but then later, Federal Department of Labor said, oh, wait, you need to do these additional identity verification things. It actually was passed in statute, I want to say, in December 2020 and took effect in January 2021. So what was difficult is a lot of benefits were already out the door, but suddenly the federal government was saying, oh, wait, you need to do this other thing to verify people's ID. I believe the department tried to go back and verify people's identity at that time, but many people may not have responded because they thought, well, I already got paid. I'm not going back into that account to look. Beacon didn't send people emails, so they didn't even know they got another request to prove they were who they said they were. So that's another category of people now who we can say, oh, it's okay if you can just prove you are who you said you were and you were legitimately entitled to benefits. That's another way to resolve your claim. That has also, there's also a large bucket of people like that because they never saw they got that additional notice. They didn't get any emails, so it's not surprising they didn't respond, and we're just giving people a chance to clean that up.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Good. Delegate Pruski.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you for the presentation. One of the concerns, I have a lot of contractors that also live in my district, and I see a slide here on the federal claims. We all know that Maryland lost 25,000, but what we don't know is the contractors that are losing their jobs. Do you have any data or concern included in this, whether it's federal government employees or contractors? Because I know it's been a while because I'm a former federal government employee, but at one point, the federal government had one job to like 3 jobs in certain agencies. So I'm just curious if you have any data on that, and is that a concern as we go forward related to this fund?
So federal contractors are paid, they're not reimbursable. They are
Okay.
paid like a private sector entity. We do track, so roughly 1 in 7 employees in Maryland is either a federal employee or a federal contractor. So we know it's a significant portion. We do track, we ask people when they're applying, are they a federal contractor? I will say the number of people who check that box just isn't very high. I think they, if you don't have to check it, it's not required. People may not want to give information. So we can get back to you, Delegate, on what we've seen so far on those numbers. I will say sort of grantees versus federal contractors may be slightly different. Some people, entities who get federal grants are nonprofits, and many nonprofits are themselves what's called reimbursable employers. They don't pay insurance and tax contributions in. They are supposed to reimburse because historically that's how some of them have worked. And so for some of them who maybe had their federal grants cut off, that can be really difficult because they don't have a lot of reserves to be able to pay off those claims.
Thank you.
Delegate Pennell, I had you next. I see your button's off. Were you still trying to say something, or?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Actually, my question was answered, and thank you so much, Secretary Wu, for being here and explaining the overpayment, and then in stating in reference to the 500 that was recovered in reference to the 700 million that was that went out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate.
Thank you. Delegate Ahrens.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Welcome. I got a couple of questions on following Delegate Pruski's comments. Do federal employees not show up in your statistics, your line items? Do they not show unemployed?
They do. I think we showed on the one of the earlier bar charts.
Where it went up to 4,300 or 4,800 or something?
Yes, it was.
Slide 4?
Slide 4, that's correct.
Yeah.
That 4,830, that was during the shutdown.
Okay.
That's why we had that big spike.
I'm wondering where would the 25,000 that have lost their jobs be? Would they be in any of your data?
So the 25,000 is 25,000 fewer jobs in Maryland. And there are a couple things behind that number. One, those jobs might have been shifted back to DC when remote work went away. 2, those jobs might have been eliminated, but they were vacancies and not filled, so those individuals didn't necessarily apply for unemployment. 3, individuals may have decided, look, I'm taking a voluntary resignation, I'm getting severance, in which case that individual either may not be eligible for unemployment insurance, or frankly, because they're getting much more in their severance than they would get in their UI benefit, it's not worth it for them to file because they wouldn't get any money from us. So I think you're right that we expected some of these numbers to perhaps be much higher than they were in terms of unemployment insurance claims. We have not yet seen that. I will note that there could be a tail here, right? People came off the fork in October, some retirements in, voluntary retirements in December. Those individuals may not yet have started looking for work or may not have filed yet. Sometimes people think they'll get a job soon and they don't want to file, but then once it goes on for months and they can't find anything, that's when we may
So
see
we
some
really
increase.
don't have a bottom line number.
Of in how many people are going to file for claims,
That's the
we
bottom
don't.
line. Out of
This-
25,000, we're able to.
This is what
justify.
we've seen so far, and frankly, that spike does not count in the 25,000, because those are overwhelmingly people who are furloughed and then went back to work.
Okay, got that. I sit on the audit committee, so I apologize for some of my questions coming up. Of this 800 million we're talking about, if you don't mind me asking, how much of this was since you came in office? How much are you?
Of this,
You know, you
I think
had
it's
the-
like
you had 2 years.
700 some million that was referred to during the audit as what we couldn't, I want to say 80 to 90% of it was incurred under the prior administration.
80 to 90% of that was,
Yes.
okay. How much of that could we have collected had we addressed it in the beginning?
It's difficult for me to say, Delegate, because as I said, much of that is pandemic-era claims. We recognize that it may not be collectible because it was because of fraud. That said, we still need to make the effort to collect it, which is why we have sent out letters trying to collect roughly $1.3 billion in overpayments, and a lot of that overlaps with the time that the auditor said that we did not issue determinations. So we believe that we are covering a lot of the time period that the auditors said the department should have taken action.
Okay. My question comes from, because when we bring in new secretaries, and I have a method to my madness on this, and we bring in a new secretary, they should know what's going on in their department. They should get an overview. And it sounds to me like when we did that, we didn't update you quickly enough that there's a lot of fraud out there. We need to go collect it. Is that true?
Delegate, I realized there was fraud and we needed to go collect it. What I did not realize, and it took a while for me to determine this, was what the prior administration had not done. For example, it did not occur to me that we were not pursuing overpayments in the way that we should be. It was, there was specialized restraints because of the litigation we were under and constraints. And, once we resolved those, we resumed the collection activities we were supposed to be doing.
Okay. I guess when I look at this stuff, and again, I'm so sensitive to this right now. I've gone through the DSS model, and we talk about these things. There's usually a briefing done, and people know what the scope of the problems are. And I just sit back and I always wonder, when we had this big of a number, because it's substantial, why we didn't look at that and say, that's a big dollar, because we knew coming into this administration the amount of fraud. We lived through the hell that unemployment had to go through past, and we knew the problems. And I just wonder why that wasn't paramount to everybody sit back. That's big dollars. And I guess part of that is, why didn't we get it sooner? And I can go on for days, and I don't want to do that. But I'll move to the next thing. I'm just telling you why I'm asking the question. When I look down at these schedules you have, you show contributions shrinking and payments shrinking. Why is the employer paying less, or why is that happening?
I'm sorry, Delegate, can you refer us to
I
the slide
wish I could, but
on 21? Is this what you're talking about?
I'll get there in 1 second, because it takes me a minute. I just don't, there's too many pages to go through.
Is it slide,
What is it?
is it slide 21 or
Might be
20?
five, I
The
don't
one with the
know.
green and the blue bars? This one?
I don't know, maybe it's blue and orange, or,
This one that's up
no,
on the?
this one had, that might have been it. Yeah, that's it, I'm sorry.
So what happened during pandemic was, you may recall, I believe the tables went from B or C to F, I think. They went up very quickly because of the drain on the trust fund. So that's why employers experienced a drastic increase in tax rates. Those who were here before me should tell me if I'm right. Was it F? Yes? Yes. Then under Governor Hogan, and working with the General Assembly, if I'm not mistaken, there was, I think it might have even been through legislation and a budget amendment, there was a large portion of ARPA funds, roughly $800 million, infused into the trust fund. And the tables were statutorily set at Schedule C, and that's why they came down.
Okay, that makes sense. I had one last question. I'm trying to put it in perspective. You know what, I don't have a word in my head right now. If you're still here in a minute, maybe I'll ask it again. Thanks.
And I think the secretary and the department have always made themselves available for follow-up, so encourage you to do that as well. Okay.
Yes, Delegate.
On the money that you collected, money that Delegate Chi was talking about, where did that go?
Most of it is going back to the federal government, the $520 million.
$520.
Yes. We've held it because we have to match up every account, and in some cases, there may be, various issues with individual accounts, but I would say the overwhelming majority of it will go back to the federal government.
Okay. Over what? You said 520, but there was over $1 billion.
So the initial, during the Hogan administration, there was, I think, $470 million recouped, and I believe all of that went to the federal government.
And what were the other two numbers? There were two other numbers after that. Where did those dollars go?
I'm not sure which
I
numbers
think
these
the
are.
only numbers were the 494 and the 520.
So, and then you added together.
Together,
Yes, okay,
yes.
that was unclear. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Delegate Bhandari.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. My question has been answered. Thank you.
Great, other questions? Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So last year we heard, because of, I guess, Doge, this is a company town and 25,000 people lost their job. So it's your testimony here today that we really don't know how many people actually lost their jobs, which is terribly unfortunate. But also, too, that a lot of that were essentially unfunded, or I'm sorry, PINs. So they were funded PINs that were eliminated, or what? Can I get some clarification?
Yeah, Delegate, I apologize. I maybe misspoke. I was going to say that's 25,000 fewer federal jobs in Maryland. That is the number we have.
Okay.
I thought the question was, how come that number isn't showing up in the exact same way in the unemployment insurance numbers?
Right.
And the reason is sometimes the job was eliminated, but maybe a person wasn't thrown out of the job. It's still a job lost to
That's
Maryland.
exactly what I'm trying to
Right,
get at,
exactly.
yeah.
Or there may be personal reasons that a person would not file
Sure,
for unemployment
early
insurance, like you're on.
retirement, they got bridged.
You're on severance, it's not worth it, or, many professionals, frankly, they can feel some stigma about applying for UI.
I just wanted
They
a
don't
little
want to do
extra
it.
clarification, because we hear a lot from members on the floor, and, okay, so that's good information to have moving forward. Thank you very much.
I will say, those numbers come from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, so they're provided by the federal government that we have 25,000 fewer federal jobs in Maryland.
Right, but
Obviously, it
that
has an
doesn't-
impact, no matter how you
That's
slice
not
it.
25,000 people.
Well, it's either a person who was in the job or could have been in the job, so I think it's still an
Could have
impact
been
for our
in the job,
economy.
but it could have been an unfilled position.
I can't speak to
that's-
how many were people
seems
or
like-
potential people.
Yeah, because we're not seeing that translate into our numbers.
We're not seeing it in terms
A
of
year later.
unemployment insurance. I do think that doesn't mean it doesn't have an economic impact.
Right, I think it's got an economic impact. I'm just trying to get at the heart of, is it 25,000 people or 3,000 people? And the reason I'm trying to do that is because I want to get at the real economic impact, not the talking points of the General Assembly. I want to get what the real, and then that way we can fix it.
Right. Thank you, Delegate. I think looking at the overall unemployment situation of Maryland, you can see our numbers have been ticking up. I do think we have been fortunate that the non-federal jobs in Maryland under this administration, we've created nearly 100,000 non-federal jobs. That has helped to offset to some degree, as if individuals are able to go into another job, they won't show up in unemployment insurance because they got another job, which is good news.
But that's 100,000 people or 100,000 jobs? Are those positions filled?
So the over 95,000 jobs, those are jobs that are created. So that means people were going into those jobs. You don't usually have a job with no one in it.
Do we know how many people are actually occupying those positions?
I believe it's 95,000.
So we
because
created
those are jobs that were created, and so individuals are in them.
They're in them?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Adams.
When Steve asked for that graph to come up, it did cause me to want to ask a question. So the UI trust fund currently is at a historically high level, but we're concerned that over time, the UI trust fund will decline. And just so I'm remembering, because you shared it, I just want to make sure I had it. Is it inflation? Is it a higher use through recession? What is the overarching concern you have about the decline and why you're projecting this out in 2036 the way that you're doing this?
Absolutely. Well, there are a number of factors, and we're happy to provide more detailed modeling to the committee. Overwhelmingly, what controls the health of the UI trust fund is the unemployment rate. So if part of the reason we have managed to continue in such strong fiscal standing now is, one, the infusion under the prior administration, two, the very low and historically way below historic levels of unemployment in the state. As unemployment increases gradually, as it's doing nationwide, that will impact the amount of benefits paid out and the trust fund. I will say part of what's going on also is during this administration, many more people have returned to work and to the labor force. Maryland had really lagged in terms of labor force participation coming back from the pandemic, but over the past 3 years, people have returned, which is good news because we need to have people in the labor force. But it does mean you also have more unemployed people because those are people actively looking for work who might not be able to find a job.
Yeah. So without updates to the system, solvency will continue to decline. And I'm assuming when you say system, you're talking about schedules or benefit balances, increases in revenue that comes to the...
Something systemic, absolutely. Some other kind of systemic change. Either that is, changes to the tables, or if there is a sudden economic downturn, some of what will happen is people will be forced to other tables. Eventually the system does correct itself. But because of the inflationary effect on wages, as I noted, you also have more and more benefits being pushed to the maximum without the taxable wage base increasing.
Okay, I actually have a couple questions, and then I'll keep going around. Can you talk more about the taxable wage base, when it was set, and like how that affects, and what it seems to me, I'll just be transparent, that's the structural thing that we need to change, and that's the structural thing that in general states change when they're trying to address this. So I just wonder if you can kind of explain that to the committee and why we might need to change that this year.
Thank you. Happy to address it, Madam Vice Chair. Maryland's taxable wage base is $8,500. So what that means is an employer, depending on what your rate is, if you're on the lowest rate, which is what most employers are, I think you pay 0.3% or something like that, on the taxable wage base of $8,500. If you pay your employee $10,000 or if you pay them $100,000, you're actually paying the exact same tax on them because you only pay it on the first $8,500. So I will note the current structure means that employers who have a lot of part-time or lower wage workers are paying as much on those employees as a defense contractor or a high-paid law firm or consulting firm. They're paying the same amount. But the high-paid employees are getting the full amount of insurance and the low-wage workers may not be. So there is a sort of disproportionate burden on those kinds of smaller businesses and like a lot of retail, restaurants, those kinds of things. Maryland is 44th in the nation, so our taxable wage base is the 44th lowest, even though we are a higher wage, higher income state.
And when was the last time that the taxable wage base was updated?
I can't remember the year. Was it
I think it was 1992.
92? Yes. 92.
So do you have if we had indexed that to inflation, do you know what it might be today?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but I believe you do, Madam Vice Chair. I don't want to speculate. I think it was something like $16,000 or $17,000, but I don't have it right in front of me.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And then what's do you know what the average across the country taxable wage base is? You said we're 44th.
I don't have it by average. Looking at some of our regional peers, only Virginia is behind us. They're at 8,000. DC's at 9,000. West Virginia's at 9,500. Pennsylvania's at 10,000. And Delaware's at 12,005. So we are low even among our region.
And Delaware's a 32nd ranked state, so we're getting close to the median.
Yeah.
Got it. And to some extent, if we had been at 10,000 for the last 10 years, we'd be in a very different place, right? So if Delaware's been there for 10 years, they've sort of caught up in some ways. Now we have to potentially raise it higher to catch up for not having done the contributions at a maybe more appropriate level.
I would say it's definitely better to spread out the contributions over time. If we had not infused that $800 million in ARPA funds into the fund, it would have sustained higher taxes for employers at a time during economic recovery, which can be very onerous. That our system means these spikes in a countercyclical way, which is not helpful.
Right, meaning that when the economy is the worst, that's when we're spiking the taxes that we're collecting because we don't have sort of a more stable way of funding the trust fund.
Yes, that's the risk.
I think we're definitely going to be taking this issue up this year, as you know, so we'll continue to work with you on that. Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
So I got a question. So, well, in my community, the overwhelming concern is timeliness of the first payments. And my question is that I think that you mentioned on page 5 that there's a staffing shortage, correct?
Yes.
And with that staffing shortage, are you saying that that you're concerned about the timeliness of the first payments, and will the call center help that?
Thank you, Delegate. Well, as you saw, Maryland, we've improved, and especially I've made that a focus during our administration, but we still need to make more improvements. We are continuing to hire up by putting state staff on the call center. It's been close to a year now that we've been implementing that. We do think that that provides better customer service to individuals. There's no question that we still need more people because we have seen, and for example, during that same period of time, we saw that spike in the furloughed individuals. Last year, we had the spike in the Francis Scott Key Bridge, thousands of people filing for unemployment all at once. Every time we have one of these emergencies, it causes a surge of staff who have to work on those claims, and it means we get backlogged on other things. So absolutely, we do need to continue to hire more staff, to improve our technology tools, to make our tools more understandable and navigable. We have overhauled our website. A lot of people say, why can't you have this pizza tracker type thing? Like, why can't I know more clearly what the steps are? So we have been working on that and we'll continue to try to improve it. And of course, welcome any feedback from you or your constituents, and especially in your role with the subcommittee, want to make sure we're addressing your concerns.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, we're coming back for second bites at the apple. We have a hearing at 1 o'clock, so I am going to ask you both to be brief in your follow-up questions. We'll go with Delegate Howard. Go ahead.
So the taxable wage, let me get back to that really quickly. So you want to take it from, because it sounds like regionally, outside of Delaware, we're in line as far as the 8,500 is concerned. So we want to index that. Imagine that there's legislation coming that we want to index that to $16,000, $17,000. I'm speculating there. What does that do? Does that mean that employers will be paying a higher tax based on the increased amount?
Delegate, I think it depends on how the legislation is drafted.
Sure.
Obviously, there are many ways to tackle it.
Okay, so in its current form, employers are paying UI based on the $8,500.
They're paying a tax based on the $8,500.
So this legislation would essentially increase the tax paid on a larger amount, correct? The UI rate might stay the same, but you're paying it on a larger amount of, let's say, $15,000, right?
I'd have to look at the Vice Chair's legislation again. I think she might be best positioned to answer questions about her bill.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is that would the agency, would you as the secretary be opposed to fencing off and protecting those funds? Because I've been down here 12 years, and it seems like we regularly go into C funds, Bay Restoration funds. There's an attempt right now to go back into Bay Restoration funds. One of the first things I did, first bills I co-sponsored, first bill I voted for, and it was voted unanimously, about 8 or 10 years ago, was fence off Bay Restoration funds. We were, for lack of a better term, we were using them like transportation trust funds of the old days, stealing them and then balancing the budget. And my concern is that we would do the same here.
Delegate, thank you for raising that. Because unemployment insurance is a federal-state partnership, we can't do that. The money that's in the trust fund has to go for unemployment insurance.
Okay.
It is part of our understanding with the federal government.
I am a firm believer that if we are going to take a dollar from the constituency and we're going to say we're going to put that towards bay restoration, that's where it needs to go, and that's where it needs to stay. So you're saying based on federal and state partnerships, that cannot happen?
Yeah, you cannot raid the unemployment insurance trust fund for some other purpose. It's not allowable.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, briefly, Delegate Bhandari, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for a wonderful job Madam Secretary doing. And I have a short question on slide 20. Again, the chart shows the EY Trust Fund growing from a low of 84 million in 2022 to approximately 1.9 billion by 2025, all labeled higher than pre-pandemic balance as well. And you explain the key actions that help achieve this recovery. And the committee would like to know how the department plans to maintain this strong trust fund position so we are prepared for future downturn while continuing to support both workers and employers. And can we infer that this current administration, Moore Miller administration, is doing great economically? What can you infer based on this?
Thank you, Delegate. I will say we can't really control what's in the trust fund. That's by statute. So we can collect what's under the law. We pay out the benefits that are under the law. I do think we are heading into somewhat unknown territory. Delegate Howard referenced the federal job impacts and Delegate Pruski, the federal contractor impacts. It's difficult for us to say what will happen in the next year. We do think we have had a strong record of non-federal job growth over the last 3 years, but of course, we are so dependent on the federal government and federal contracts that could have an outsized impact. Obviously, it's our job to be good stewards of the unemployment insurance trust fund. That's why we're pursuing overpayments, although we recognize it may be upsetting for individual constituents. If they were caught in fraud, we do have to go after those potential dollars out there, even if we may not be able to recover much of it. But I think that we stand ready to work with the committee. We do know that over the long term, it's important to preserve a strong unemployment insurance trust fund that's there for workers and for businesses to be that, to cushion any economic downturn. So we stand ready to work with you to make sure we're being responsible stewards and take the best action for Marylanders.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And I think as I had started to say when Delegate Ahrens forgot his last question and then remembered it, I know that the department is always willing to work with members, any follow-up questions. And so thank you, Madam Secretary and team, for all the work you do. We look forward to working with you throughout this session. And members, we have a bill hearing at 1 o'clock. Please be prompt.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.